members, officers and the public watching on the webcast to today's meeting of the Audit Panel. In accordance with government regulations, we're holding this meeting on a virtual basis with Assembly members and guests participating remotely. Could I ask everyone to check that their electronic devices are switched to silent mode and that their microphones are switched to mute when they're not talking? That's to avoid interruptions. Can I now ask our clerk Mehibea Ibra, if any apologies have been received for today's meetings and to confirm members participating.
Thank you, Chairman. The Assembly members currently present on this call are yourself, the Chairman, Assembly Member Hall, Assembly Member Moore and Assembly Member Prince. Assembly Member Desai will be joining us shortly and apologies have been received from Deputy Chair, Assembly Member Duval, for whom Assembly Member Desai is substituting.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can we note the declarations of interests, and does any member have any other declarations to make? No. Can I ask members to note the membership and chairing arrangements? Thank you. Can we note the panel's terms of reference? Can we note the standing delegations of authority to me, the chairman of the panel, as set out in the agenda and as agreed by the London Assembly at its annual meeting on the 15th of May 2020? Can we confirm the minutes of the audit panel meeting held on the 10th of March 2020? Thank you. And since publication of the item, further information was received in response to the outstanding action from the audit panel meeting on the 19th of March 2019 and will be included as an appendix to the minutes. Can I ask the panel to note the completed and the closed and outstanding actions arising from previous meetings of the audit panel? Yep, thank you very much. Right, we now move on to our main item of business today, which is to review the internal audit reports. David Esling, the Head of Audit and Assurance at the Mayor's Office of Policing and Crime, MOPAC, will introduce this for us. David.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. The first review was our review of risk management framework within the GLA. This received a substantial assurance, and we process this along the maturity framework, so that the maturity framework goes from 1 almost starting risk management to 5 leading, and the GLA have been assessed at level 4, which is working well, means the risk management process and framework within the GLA is embedded. However, there were 2 recommendations, and these are listed on page 32. The first one relates to GLA fraud risks, and that those are updated regularly, and as part of that process we are assisting the GLA to assess those fraud risks with our internal audit fraud section. And also the second recommendation refers to the GLA group risks, and this is something where obviously with the GLA group, whether the risk management frameworks and the risk management processes within the GLA, how those risks are being escalated, and that's something that's going to be looked into to see whether there can be any alignment and join up with that. I think David is talking to this paper as the officer, so I'll hand over to David if there are any questions for members.
Okay, David, do you want to say anything? I've certainly got a couple of questions here, but do you want to say something first?
Yeah, just to reiterate what David has just said, really helpful recommendations. Obviously working with him and his team around enhancing the fraud assessment as he described, but also I think it's a really interesting recommendation in light of the pandemic to look at group-wide risks. So taking that forward, strategically across the authority, but very much we're not looking to replicate the individual risk registers across the group, but take a strategic view of the group-wide potential risks.
Thank you. You've actually answered my first question with that. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and I'll go to Alison. The most recent iteration of the corporate risk register that was brought to the committee on the 10th of March shows that Brexit to be more imminent of a risk to the GLA than coronavirus. I would say that I don't think there's any greater risk to London than coronavirus and the knock-on effect that it's going to have. Should that therefore not be updated?
Chairman, I think that's right, but I think perhaps things have now got to a point where those two risks are actually merging together. The impact of coronavirus and the potential impact of Brexit are ones that kind of feel that becoming almost the same sort of pressure and risk, particularly the pressure on London's economy. So we're happy to look at that, and when we bring back the risk register to your next meeting in the autumn, we'll make sure that we reflect that.
I mean, you only update this every 6 months. Do you not think, given the state of everything with coronavirus, etc., that we should update it on a more regular basis?
We update it more regularly. We just report it to your panel every 6 months, but obviously happy if you feel it's appropriate, we bring it to your every meeting, if that's something you think would be appropriate. I
absolutely do. Given the situation we're in now, I was somewhat concerned to see that that you thought that Brexit was more of a risk than coronavirus, so definitely would. I'll go straight to Alison now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. In a sense, it was my first question as well. The issue around effectively a corporate element of the risk register. And I think COVID-19 has very much emphasised that for me, that you've got a series of unprecedented challenges around within the GLA, both the response to COVID, the financial shortfall coming out of that, and the potential move to the crystal. It does affect the group wide, and you're looking at those challenging codependencies that there may well be across the group, and it seems to me that that would make a great deal of sense. I mean, you will have had a pandemic risk within all of those registers at some point previously, but actually the pressure across the organisation is quite significant. So I'm pleased to see that you're looking at that, and would be very interested to see the progress of that.
Yeah, obviously we'll happily report back to your next meeting on that. I think the thing that particularly jumps out without sort of preempting the conversations that we'll have across the group is clearly the impact of the Mayor's budget guidance across the group, and the compounding effect that would have across all the members. So I think that's one that immediately jumps out in addition, as you say, Alison, to the COVID risk.
Yeah. Yes, and I think others will emerge as part of that work. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Do we go back to you, David Esling, now?
Yes. Thank you, Chair. So the second review is the review of the delegation of the Adult Education Budget Fund. This received, we were looking at the framework again in this, and this received a substantial assurance. We found that there was effective governance arrangements that have been established with clear roles and responsibilities. As part of that, 306 million has been delegated to the Mayor in 1920 to increase the number and diversity of adult learners in London. I think Claire is on here to take any questions, but this is a good framework that has been developed and is in place. Just as an aside to that, and this is detailed in our update report later, but we also are giving a great deal of advisory work, internal audit advisory work in this area as well. So this also helps to give assurance to the GLA and Assembly members of the effectiveness of this.
Okay, I'll start. I've got one question on this. I see that there's 14 providers that are at high risk. So what actions are being taken to manage the risks of these 14 providers?
So sorry, thank you, Chair, for your question. Those 14 providers obviously was a snapshot in time when we went through that process. Now, I don't have the up-to-date information on where we're at now, but we do absolutely monitor all of the risks on a really regular basis through our delivery groups and then through our Skills for Londoners Programmes Board. And then everything, due to the delegation arrangements, we take everything directly through to the Mayor through the AB Mayoral Board. We have in this year just reduced funding for a number of providers. I think it was 11. We've just taken through a mayoral decision on that where the performance or the risk status was up to date. And I probably better to confirm that in writing afterwards in case I've slightly misquoted that. But we actively monitor that. We do address that. We look at performance against our timeframes, against money and delivery. So we do very actively monitor that.
Yeah, if you could put that in writing to all of us.
Of course, yes, absolutely.
And basically how you're going to manage that, because I suspect that list will get longer and we need to make sure that money is spent properly. Alison.
No, I couldn't agree more, Chair. I mean, I'm pleased to see there's a sound framework, and that's a very good starting point. Everyone is quite a disparate group of spend, but clearly adult education is one of those areas that's going to become even more important during that recovery period, and getting the right delivery on the ground in the right communities to upskill and reskill adults will be very important. So I think Councillor Hall, Assemblymember Hall makes a very important point in terms of monitoring that tightly, and I hope that we'll have an opportunity in the education panel to look at the outputs from that over the coming meetings. But I'm very keen that we keep an eye on this and make sure. I'm conscious through my council work that one of the challenges has been significant amounts of government money coming in, for example, to local councils and going out as business grants, and that actually doing due diligence and having a good monitoring framework in that has been critical, and that there's variation across London in terms of the way different authorities have dealt with that, and that it has been problematic for some. So particularly important that we do that and keep assessing those organisations delivering on the ground. So thank you.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. We do continue to actively monitor. It is probably worth mentioning that since this report came out, and this was very much looking at the governance framework and processes in place rather than where we are at now. But since this has come out, we've obviously entered these unprecedented times with COVID-19, and that has created issues for our delivery providers having to go to online courses. Not all of them can do that. The Mayor launched an £11 million sort of rapid response fund to try and support the sector, and we've delayed the performance point for now while they catch up on that. So at the moment we are very much working with all of our AEB providers, but some of the data that comes out around performance and what we get is likely to come a little bit later now, because we obviously don't want to affect the stability of all of our providers.
Okay, it's something to keep an eye on. It's such a massive
Absolutely.
And we
Absolutely.
really
Yeah.
keep an eye on that. Thank you. So back to you then, David.
Okay, thank you. So the third review carried out is the review of the key material systems, and this is looking at the key financial systems within the GLA. We focused on this particular review on the creditors, debtors and payroll. As you will see that this received an adequate rating. There were 7 recommendations made, of which 2 have already been implemented. There are also 2 follow-up recommendations from previous material systems work carried out the previous year that we also looked at as part of the review that have been found to be implemented. I know Charmaine and David are here to take any questions. Charmaine, I guess, particularly on the payroll, and David on payroll on creditors and debtors. And also I can take any as well.
Okay, I've got no follow-ups. Umesh, have you any, or Keith, Alison? No, I think you've got away with that, Charmaine.
Sorry, just a Chair, if I might, a very quick one. Just confirming the situation with LFB's ability to continue to deliver on payroll, and just to confirm that is on track.
Thank you, Assemblymember Moore. Yes, so there is a new payroll manager in LFB now. We've got good relationships with them. We have started to track and manage where there are issues. You'll see that the report, actually, the audit report also makes recommendations about their regular reporting on this. We are a major client of theirs, so to speak, in a shared service environment. Hence, they have dedicated staff to help to manage the payroll for the GLA. Clearly, over the next period, LFB are looking at their own transformation plans, as we are, but we have a stable relationship at the moment, and on both sides, I don't have any reason to doubt their competence or their ability to continue to provide that for us in the medium term.
That's helpful. My experience of another organisation suggests that that's not always the case with providers, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. Back to you, David. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Now we're moving to follow-up reviews, and these are reviews that have the full reviews have already been undertaken, and this is work to understand and to look into the recommendations of whether they've been implemented. So the next review was the follow-up review of the transformation programme. As you see from the 3 recommendations that were made, all have been implemented. I think Michelle is online if anyone wants any questions there, but what that means is that now receives a substantial rating for those areas that review looked into.
I have no questions. Do my colleagues have any?
No.
No, I think
No,
we're
thank you,
fine
Chair.
on that then. Thank you. Oh, hang on.
Okay.
Assembly Member
Just
Prince,
a
sorry.
question on training. I believe we've been offered some training, but would we do that virtually now, I suppose?
So which type of training are you talking about? You talking about
unless I've
IT?
got the wrong section, because I'm flicking through this on a little screen. But I believe that around the Treasury management.
That's the next one.
Sorry, I
that's
thought
the
we'd
next
gone.
one.
Sorry, I'll get it on that one.
Right.
Yep.
No other questions on that. So we thank you very much,
So-
Michelle. You can move on then, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So yes, I'll move on to the follow-up of the Treasury Management Review. There were 11 agreed actions from the original review, of which all have now been implemented, so it receives a substantial rating. I note that Luke is here, and he can take any questions, obviously, from Assembly Member Prince on the training one in particular.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, there's a couple of areas. Obviously, it's a very specialist business, and I just thought there is an offer of training, and it would be quite helpful to have some training. But how would that now be delivered?
We would deliver that via this medium at the moment. We did a recent quarterly meeting of the Group Investment Syndicate, because obviously the training is available to all of the participating bodies. Our executive support officers are working on a series of dates, and we'll certainly share them with this committee, and in fact all Assembly members. So anybody who wishes to attend will be able to book slots on those dates, and they'll be delivered by a combination of me and my team and our independent advisors, Link Asset Services.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you. Luke, can I ask you, in light of budget constraints that the COVID-19 is causing the GLA, will the Treasury Management Review happen more regularly?
We're committed to an annual programme of audit for Treasury Management, and we're very happy to report to this committee or others as frequently as you would like us to. We produce, as it were, numbers on a quarterly basis that are sort of fully closed. So we're happy to report on that cycle or less frequently as you might like. The Treasury Management Strategy itself is very much a living document, and something that we consider day by day, particularly at times of market turbulence. And we have good, well-established contacts with the corporate management team in the Mayor's office to discuss changes that might be required as and when those circumstances arise.
Okay, because it's such a rocky situation, aren't we? David.
Yeah, Chair, perhaps I could suggest that I think maybe the way forward would be to take up the offer of training, because as you say, it's a very complex specialist area. And I think by listening to particularly our independent Treasury advisors, I think that might help focus what you should be looking at and the kind of questions that you perhaps would feel better to kind of challenge Luke and his team on by having that training. So perhaps do the training first and then think, well, then what would be the right role for the panel or the Assembly more generally in reviewing Treasury and holding us to account?
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. Thank you. I think we should do that because we want to be doing this properly. It's essential. Okay, no more questions. Okay, thank you. David again, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. This is the final follow-up review of the GLA Open project system, which was carried out in November 2019. Of the two recommendations, that were made within that. One has been fully implemented and one partly implemented, so it receives an adequate assurance rating. Nahida, I see, is here, and she can answer any questions that you have on that, and again, myself as well.
I have no questions. Do my colleagues have any questions? No? Thank you anyway. Thank you for being there to answer. Right, okay, David, back to you again.
Okay, thank you. So this moves on to work that we undertake in the grant and auditing the grant claims for the GLA. So Appendix 3A, 3B and 3C are where the work that's been undertaken to give assurance to central government on those grant claims. Willing to take any questions there, but I think they're probably taken as identified and read.
Certainly from me, and I don't see anybody indicating. Yeah, okay, we can move on, David. Thank you.
So just scrolling down. So now we move on to the internal audit progress report that details the work undertaken between March and July of this year. As you see, it details the work already completed, of which I've already spoken about on those reviews and follow-up reviews. Just makes specific reference to obviously COVID-19 and the recovery work. What we're doing there is we will continue to conduct our reviews remotely, and we found that actually that's had very little impact because the remote side and receiving the papers and evidence has not been affected particularly on that. But also COVID-19 has resulted in the adoption of a number of revised processes within GLA, which part of that is the payment of suppliers. And in talking with David Galley there, we're going to do some specific work on suppliers where the provision of goods or services have been prevented or hindered significantly, and for adjustments to facilitate payments made. So that's a piece of work that we've been asked to undertake, and we will be doing that as an amendment to the audit plan. There's also continuation of systems development work. I mentioned, as I've already mentioned, the adult education budget and advisory work that we've been undertaking with that, and that's through bi-weekly audit insurance task and finish group meetings that we attend and advise there. There's also detail of the counter fraud work that's been completed in the fourth quarter, and this very much details the work that's been undertaken as part of the National Fraud Initiative, and it details the number of matches and the review and results of that. I think that probably covers everything, and to date we've completed 445 days of the 1920 internal audit plan, which and all work has been completed in accordance with that. Willing to take any questions on that, and also the detailed work that's planned for the forthcoming year.
Okay, Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier about payment of suppliers. Now, obviously this is just the audit panel, but obviously at this moment in time, cash flow is king. So if we were a business, I'd be saying we obviously need to slow down payments of suppliers, but because the economy is in such a way, especially with small and medium-sized businesses, we would really want to pay them as soon as possible. But do you know what our terms are for suppliers?
Well, in my understanding from that, and David can correct me, but it's normally 28 days from date of invoice for payment. But part of this is to look at, and part of that review is to look at any terms or any different terms within that, but or whether the GLA would be looking into amending those terms. But I defer to David if that's something that's in process.
Chair, if I can add to what David Esling said. That's correct, but also we have a policy of 10 days for SMEs as well, and that's obviously particularly important in terms of being able to try and ensure that small businesses can survive in these difficult circumstances. But just to underline what David has said, I mean, the conversations I've been having with him felt it really important as part of a revision to this year's plan that we do look specifically at, the additional risks that the GLA has taken by, in certain circumstances, paying in advance, by deferring the interest payments that have been due on, say, from housing RSLs. All the work that we've been trying to do is encouraged and facilitated by the government's advice to try and use the strength that we have in our cash flow for the benefit of sustaining London's businesses.
How do you assess who you should be paying in advance and who you shouldn't?
That's been, we took a view to try and delegate that down as far as we could to for our management chairs, to our assistant directors, rather than looking to kind of prescribe a set of central rules, thinking that that would be a better way of ensuring that we don't create bureaucratic delays. But obviously that's brought at a kind of concern and risk that certainly I have and others have around the potential for that to be abused by certain people. Obviously that's why I'm particularly concerned that internal audit would look at this independently as well, to ensure that that hasn't been that scale of problem that may have been encountered.
But I think it is important. Sorry, it is important that we do ensure that the departments are meeting those deadlines for SMEs as well, and that they're not dragging their. I mean, I was going to name it. I won't name one particular member of our family who is notorious for not processing their invoices in good time.
I mean, just on the target of the 10 days for SMEs is one that we've consistently met. So that's been something that we've been very proud of. It's obviously a very important consideration. And indeed, within our colleagues in TfL who look at the support we can give to SMEs as well, that's been obviously a core priority for the Mayor, and rightly so.
Can we just row back? You said you're paying people in advance. What sort of monies have been paid in advance? What's the total amount of money that's paid in advance of anything for it, as it were?
I haven't got those figures to hand, Chairman. It'll obviously be part of the review internal audit would look at, but obviously happy to take stock of the processes so far by implementing the Cabinet Office's advice on this, to give you a kind of headline view in advance of the review that David's team would undertake. What we've also found is important is not just the issue of paying potentially in advance of goods being received, but also of income that we've been due in, particularly interest service payments from housing RSLs. Also, it's important we look at both sides, the income and the spend side.
Yes, I mean, that is a risk, and I would like more information on that, please, to get an idea on what sort of monies we're talking about, because as I constantly say, it's not our money, it's taxpayers' money. So very concerned.
I'm happy to supply that directly to you, Chair, in advance of the review that we would do with internal audit.
Be very grateful for that. Do my colleagues have any other questions? No. Okay, David, for the last one, I think.
No, I think that's everything for me, Chair.
Okay. Have we got no more follow-ups at all? No.
No.
Okay, right, now that brings us then to the end of that. Can we note the internal audit reports attached to the report?
Agreed.
Yes, my golly, thank you. Okay, external audit report. We will now receive an introduction from our external auditor, and it's not Andrew Britton, it's thank you. Sorry, I just changed at the last minute. You see, you auto confused me, Janet. I apologise. Okay.
That's not a problem. So apologies for the last minute change. I was able to attend as the external audit partner. Then I had a clash. Andrew was going to step into the breach, and then actually we managed to move the clash. So I'm here to talk you through our external audit strategy for the 2019-20 accounts. Both for GLA itself and then also for its group. So I am the audit partner who signs off on GLA and group, and Andrew Britton is the associate partner who signs a number of the bodies within the group, including GLAH, GLAP, LLDC and its group. Right, so let me just take you to the overview of our strategy, and if I take you through the key points in there and then stop and we can talk we take any questions at that point. You'll see that there are two documents. The first one is the strategy that we developed and talked through with officers through to March, just as COVID hit. So the second one is where we then took a little time away to reassess the risk profile and the risks to the audit, and we produced an addendum which just highlights a number of other areas that we have now raised as either significant or higher levels of risk to the delivery of the audit. So you'll see that from our page 5, we've identified a number of risks to the audit. The first two of which are standard auditor assessments of the risk of fraud across any audit, external audit that is delivered. So the risk of misstatements due to fraud or error, and then what's termed the revenue and expenditure recognition risk. And we do particular work at any organisation to focus where we think there may be a risk of manipulation or error due to fraud within the accounts. So that's why those two are always included as a fraud risk across an audit. So then we go on to the pensions valuation, and that you'll see again that is held as a significant risk. No change from previous years. It's a material item. Its valuation is complex. There are a lot of assumptions used by actuaries. You have management experts to advise you on what that valuation is. We use our experts to advise us on how that is arrived at and reflected in the accounts. And clearly there's an element this year which is, as at the 31st of March, just exactly what was going on with investment valuations, any particularly difficult to value assets. For example, if the pensions hold property within that, we'll be looking at what work is being done by the pensions auditor and how that relates into the pensions liability that's held in your accounts. We then move on to the E20 onerous contract provision. Again, this has been in our plan in previous years. We consolidate in E20's financial statements into the group. There is a material provision in there. It's a question of whether that remains at an appropriate level. And clearly we look at any restructuring plans, any future plans, anything that might then impact on the value at which that is held to protect against future costs, future liabilities. We include assessment of the group boundary in preparation of the group accounts in there, because clearly there's a number of initiatives, a number of developments go on each year within the group, different companies being set up. So we need to have a look across your span of control and the materiality of those different bodies that are being set up and starting to operate. Some of which we audit, some of which we don't. And also this year we need to look carefully again around the role and the relationship between GLA and the London Fire Commissioner, particularly given the transformation plans that have been in place and some of the changes in the working arrangements and governance between the two organisations in the last 12 months as a result of the issues that they've been having and the oversight that GLA has been providing. We move on to property valuations, and this really sits down within the group and sits within LLDC's accounts and obviously GLAP and the complexity of those property holdings and how those are valued. And I have to say, this again is an area that is affected quite significantly by the COVID-19 situation, because all valuers have identified as a general theme across their valuations a material uncertainty in arriving at the numbers that they've provided to organisations to include in their accounts because of the situation and because of the lack of market, and also where those valuations are predicated on future forecasts, really the uncertainty around what those valuations might arrive at. And we're working very closely at the moment with the finance team and awaiting more information from GL Hearn, the valuers, to be able to get to a situation where we understand what the valuation is in the accounts and what the level of uncertainty is around those numbers. And then we had business rates pooling and appeals provision. Clearly, GLA receives 36% of all business rates income in London and then has a share of those provisions and debtors and creditors on its balance sheet. And that figure is judgmental and also requires quite a lot of work across the various organisations feeding into GLA. And again, you'll see in the addendum that we increased the level of risk associated with this as a result of C19, due to the change in the time scale that was provided to the London boroughs to provide that information to you, but also because of the increased uncertainty as to the recoverability of the debtors in particular as at the year end. Just to move quickly to the other areas of risk that we then identified in our addendum, we also included loan investments, in particular, as a higher risk, in particular because of the recoverability risk around those, depending on, to which organisations those loans had been provided and their financial situation as a result of the pandemic, and also long-term debtors in terms of the members of the groups to whom you've provided support in the past and their financial position and the impact on them going forward. So those are the key areas of risk. We looked at materiality, and that's really the level to which we test and gain assurance over the statements. And you'll see on page 7 that we've set performance materiality at 42 million for the group. So we consider what a reader would find materially different if there was an error or a change in the number. And we test to 42 million, but assume that a reader would their understanding would be affected if there was a difference of 56 million. We've had another think about that in the light of COVID, but we're content that that's an appropriate level to set that at. The other point that I was going to take you to was our VFM conclusion. So we look at the arrangements in place in the organisation during the year to achieve value for money. So the arrangements to achieve economy, efficiency and effectiveness. And if I can just find the appropriate page for that. That starts on our page 21, which sets out our responsibilities. And then you'll see on page 22 and 23 where we identify the risks associated with governance and financing challenges across the GLA. And we're really looking at what arrangements have been in place during 1920 to manage those risks across the group and to understand and put in arrangements to manage the financing challenges that affect the group as a whole, and from GLA's perspective in support of those. And clearly, I've already referenced the London Fire Commissioner and their response to the external inspection findings. And what we're interested in from GLA's perspective is your oversight role and any changes that you have made to your arrangements to carry out that oversight role in respect of LFC to ensure that it is operating appropriately within your remit for them, as it were. So those are the key areas of focus. I'll stop there because there's quite a lot of information in that. I'm happy to take any questions.
Yes, there is. Thank you. I can see Assembly Member Prince indicating. You need to.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. That was very comprehensive. Can I drag you all the way back about half an hour ago to the E20 onerous contract? Because clearly, in many respects, it's become more onerous because it didn't make a profit when West Ham were there and E20 were collecting revenues from the entertainment side and the other provisions. Of course, ironically, unlike most other arts and performing venues, West Ham are still playing there. They're playing in the wrong time of the year, so that's had a knock-on effect to other possible rentals that E20 may have had. So, and also there's no revenue coming through the add-ons like the food and the other subsidiary work that E20 take money for. So you may have thought that would make it less onerous, but in fact that seems to make it more onerous, although what is a real question mark is over the movement of the seats, which is a very expensive process that happens every year. It looks as though UK Athletics won't be using the arena this year, and if that's the case, there could well be a substantial saving in relation to removing and replacing the seats. So I think there's a lot of variables there which will affect the value or the non-value, if you like, of that contract.
I'm just waiting to see if David's going to come in, but you're right, Assembly Member Prince. That is exactly what Andrew and his team are currently looking at within their audit of E20, and exactly how each of those variables move, and what that, therefore, the long-term projection of the provision should be, how that's been arrived at, and how it reflects those changes in those variables. So those are relatively short-term changes that may or may not have a significant material effect on the overall value of the provision. But yes, they're looking at that as we speak.
But that, you know, they are larger numbers, whichever way you look at it.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I think David Galley wants to come in, and then Umish afterwards.
So yeah, Keith, you're absolutely right. It's one of the kind of perverse effects of COVID is that, oddly, the stadium actually reduces its losses, but of course LLDC as a whole is making a net cost here that's costing us more than the saving that would arise from the stadium. We're obviously working really closely with LLDC around those costs. Those costs are still obviously not wholly identified yet. There's still some way to go on what they might be. But obviously working with Janet's team in particular around ensuring that there's an appropriate provision for all those liabilities that come from the immediate COVID costs, but also more long term around the whole viability of LDC and the East Bank development. So a lot of work's probably one of the biggest risks that we are dealing with.
Do you know, David, if in any, I suppose it probably isn't the right time, but do you know if there's been any progress made around sponsorship and naming rights, I think they call it?
I don't offhand, Keith, but perhaps I can ask one of my LLDC colleagues to give you an update on that.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Umish Desai.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I was just going to emphasize the concerns that Assembly Member Prince has raised, but the issue of the sponsorship, I must say, I confess, I couldn't resist having a chuckle because we've been asking questions about sponsorship for about 3 years now. And as one finance expert, a football finance expert told me, he said that if you do want a good sponsorship deal and naming rights around a sporting stadium in particular, it's really when you move in, just before you move in or just after you move in. But 3-4 years down the line, he says, forget it. And as to why such an iconic stadium could not get a sponsor in its very early days, when you've got stadiums. I mean, this stadium is in my constituency, but you've got Dagenham and Redbridge Football Club, which is also in my constituency, and they got sponsored by a local building company now, and they're not short of potential sponsors, from what I gather. So there are issues there. But the point I really want to make, Chair, is it's not just a stadium. I should know this, but I'm not sure. But it's like places like the Mitchell Tower. I mean, the other revenue earning streams that have simply dried up because of COVID, and so I think the Mitchell Tower is still open to the public. But even if it's not, a lot of concerts, it's not just short-term events, concerts, games, other revenue streams within the Olympic Park will not get any income. So what I really want to ask is that it would be good to have some projections for E20 finances, not just short-term, but for the foreseeable future or the next year, because as I say, I just got events taking place for a good year at least, and I will raise some of these issues to the Budget and Performance Committee.
I think it's better under that. Yes.
Yeah.
I think so, and I think it's a thing of interest, but I think it's more budget than it is audit. Yeah. But good points, though, Assembly Member Desai. Assembly Member Moore.
Yes, two small points, more technical and broader points. The first is around the set of list of issues to watch, the going concern implications, risk of property valuations, and to some degree the NDR pooling and appeals provision. Do I understand, having looked at other people's audits, that they're being commonly flagged and commonly applied across a range of auditors and bodies? And secondly, in the context of quite a complex set of audits across during quite a challenging time in terms of delivery, are you comfortable that you are going to be able to maintain the timetable you have on page 36 and be able to submit on time?
So thank you. On the first one, yes, you will see property valuations, recoverability of debts, difficulties in valuing investments as common issues across all local authority audits at present, and how those play in, therefore, to the going concern assessment, which, I was just sitting reflecting, I should have brought to your attention. There's an assumption as a statutory body that you are a going concern within the public sector, because you are established and will continue until there's a governmental edict to say you won't. So we make that assumption, but then we look at the risks and uncertainties within your accounts and understand the mitigations against those, and would expect that commentary to be included in the accounts so that we as auditors can assess that, and if necessary bring the reader's attention to that with an emphasis of matter paragraph in our opinion. So it's not a qualified or even a modified opinion in accounting speak, but it is an additional paragraph to point the reader's attention to the management's assessment of what those uncertainties and risks look like and how they're reflected within the accounts, or which balances would be affected by those in the accounts. So yes, those are pretty standard at the moment, I'm afraid, and a lot of additional work is going into those areas across the board. In terms of the complexity and the delivery of audits, well, we've successfully managed to deliver the majority of NHS audits that have an earlier deadline, and some NAO audits that we support pre-recess. We are able to work very effectively remotely, virtually, and the audit is underway at the moment, and that is progressing well for GLA. Slightly stickier in some of the other organisations, unfortunately, at the moment. The deadline has actually moved out to the 30th of November, and so what we're having to do is have the audit in two phases. Wait for the information to be coming in from the London boroughs on their later deadline around business rates and NNDR and council tax, and also some delays on the pension audit because of slightly later information coming through to the pension auditor. But we should be able to pull that information in and comfortably meet the 30th of November deadline.
Good.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Almost your hands up. Is it still meant to be up? No, that's fine. That's fine. Just don't want to miss you if you have. Any other questions from colleagues? No. Okay. Can we note the GLA Group Audit Planning Report and the contents of the GLA Audit Planning Report update? Yes, thank you, noted. Yes. And thank you very much, Janet, for coming back to us. Right. Okay. We're now on to the next section. It's the draft annual governance statement 2019-20. Did you want to say anything, David Gully, on that?
Just very briefly, Chairman, just two things. The annual governance statement is a really important document that goes in parallel with the accounts. But I think one of the things I'd like to emphasise is that we're very conscious of the Assembly's role here in our governance, and hopefully the draft document in front of you reflects that. But obviously we're very keen to get your comments and thoughts. But I'm conscious that this also goes to the Oversight Committee next week as well, so you've got another opportunity as well to comment. But obviously we're really keen to get your views, ensure that we've fully reflected the contribution that the Assembly makes to our overall governance. Okay, I mean, I'll just give you a couple of things. We need to be much clearer about TfL capital projects which are potentially at risk. We need to clarify what his core housing targets are, rather than having a wide range.
review the processes and governance of the Old Oakham Park Royal Development Corporation. Maybe we'll talk about it more next time, but there are quite a few issues there that I think need to be raised. Julie Norgrove.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say that actually our annual opinion, which was in the report submitted to the committee on page 109, it just states that the GLA has an adequate internal control environment which is generally operating effectively. I think that's worthy of note, as that has informed the annual governance statement itself. And just to confirm that in our report, we are stating that the GLA has well-defined governance arrangements, and as we heard earlier from David, effective risk management arrangements, which has contributed to that opinion, and that generally the reports that we see are rated adequate or better, in fact 92% of the cases. So just wanted to make that point, as it has actually contributed to the overall statement that you see before you.
Okay, fine, thank you. Do any of my, Umesh, your hands up? Do you want to ask anything?
No.
No? Okay, fine. Okay, if there are no other comments, can we note that report then, colleagues, which brings us on to monitoring of expenses, etc. David, this is yours again. David Galley.
Chair, I've nothing to add to the report. Obviously happy to take any questions.
I've got a question on expenses. The Deputy Mayor for Business claimed £941.85 for hotel in Birmingham. That was visiting the Labour Party conference. And James Murray, also Deputy Mayor for Housing, claimed for the Labour conference. Now, Rajesh Agarwal is on 132k. James Murray, I know he's not a deputy mayor anymore, he's on 130k a year. Can you explain why they're claiming for, it looks like hotel stay, when they're deputy mayors to the Labour Party? There's probably an answer.
Well, obviously, they are claims that can be made within our expenses and benefits framework. I mean, their attendance there is not as Labour Party members, and indeed their expenses claims have been abated down by their Labour Party membership. And their attendance there is to promote the GLA rather than for any party political activity.
I'm just aware of how this looks, quite frankly. When I'm sure the public, if they know people are on 132k, 130k, claiming to stay at their own party conference is a bit rich. But if it's within the framework, I accept unreservedly that I suspect nothing can be done about that. Although that's disappointing in itself, really. Has anybody else got anything to say? Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it's actually attendance at the Labour Party conference in Brighton, and presumably that was last year, not in Birmingham, and there were 3 attendees, two with Labour Party, Deputy Mayor for Business, the Mayoral Director of Communications, and the Deputy Mayor for Housing. Can I ask you, David, did they go to any other party political conferences to promote the GLA or advance the cause of the GLA?
I'm not aware that they've done, although there's certainly no expense claims that they've made for any attendance at other party conferences other than the Labour one in Brighton.
So the point I would seek to make, and on the assumption that they did not attend any other party political conferences, is more about establishing good practice. Let me make it absolutely clear that I'm not challenging the legitimacy of the claims. It's more about also like appropriateness of the claim, that if public monies are being used to attend a party political conference by GLA officers, then I think it's important that attend conferences of all the main political parties to promote or defend or advance the cause of the GLA. They do only go to one party political conference, then logic demands that it should be the party political conference of the party in government, which sadly is not us. So I can understand someone going to a conservative who happen to be in power because there's a party of government and to advance the cause of the GLA where it counts. So it's more, I think, establish some guidelines here, some good practices, and not give the wrong perception, as the members are still aware of this, with officers as well. It's more of a public perceptions that we talk about. But there's absolutely no, I'm not questioning, I don't think anyone else questioning the legitimacy of the claims. It's more good practice.
Yes, and perception, certainly. Assembly Member Prince.
Yeah, just to make the point, Sir Robin Wales, who was a well-known socialist of Newham, frequently attended the Conservative Party conferences because he wanted to promote Newham to the government. And so the point that Assembly Member Desai was making is perfectly true. If we really want to promote the GLA, we should be at least at the party of government, whichever party that may be.
Absolutely.
Okay. Is everybody happy now? Can we note that report then, colleagues?
Sorry, Chair. Just to say, can we come back in due course, David, about just looking at this area? Not the most important thing right now in terms of GLA finances, audit and all that, but I think it'd be good to get, some guidelines or something.
I mean, my memory, it'd be helpful to go back, is that I'm sure in earlier years, relevant officers have actually attended other conferences than the Labour Party one. Perhaps it would be helpful if I went back and just double checked that in earlier years there has actually been attendance at more than one conference, and in particular perhaps attendance at the governing party's conference. I'm happy to go back and do a little bit more digging on that for you, and Mesh, if that was of help.
To be honest, no, David, I respect and appreciate the offer. It's more just setting guidelines for the future, maybe, but if the past helps you to establish guidelines, so it's all in black and white, no room for any doubts or anything. I'll leave it to you.
Just one point on the guidelines. Obviously, the guidelines allow deputy mayors, officers to attend all party political conferences rather than just, the Labour one or the governing party one. So the guidelines as such, allow that discretion that I think you'd want to them to consider. And
then it's about tightening the guidelines, to reflect the points that we made.
Okay, I think we all accept within this committee they were not outside the guidelines. Nevertheless, it leaves a bad taste in the mouth that people claim to go to their own party's conference. But I think we should leave it at there. So can we note the report, colleagues? Thank you. Work programme. I don't think we need to discuss that, do we, Maheva? Do we? No.
Agreed.
I think we excellent. We'll agree that then. Date of the next meeting of the committee will be confirmed in due course by the London Assembly. I have any other urgent business, so I declare the meeting finished. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank